Stay with me until the vows, because the lie in this story isn't the one you'll suspect in the first 5 minutes, and the person who finally says it out loud isn't who you'd bet on either. Somewhere in this story is a sealed envelope that sat in a garage for 6 weeks doing absolutely nothing, and then, on one Saturday in October, undid a wedding, a friendship, and a version of my daughter I didn't get back for almost a year. If you've ever had to decide whether telling the truth was an act of love or an act of demolition, keep listening. I still don't know which one I chose. I just know I'd choose it again. They say a postal worker learns to read a house from its mail before she ever reads its people. Forwarding requests that mean someone's leaving. Collection notices that mean someone's drowning quietly. A magazine subscription that just stops. No explanation. The year someone's marriage ends and nobody renews the things that used to feel permanent. My name is Marisol Reyes. I'm 61, 34 years on a mail route through the North Valley of Albuquerque, retired 11 months, and still incapable of walking past an open mailbox without wanting to sort it, straighten it, make it tell the truth faster than the person it belongs to is ready for. 3 days before my daughter Daniela's wedding, that habit is exactly what undid everything. I was in my garage, not snooping, looking for packing tape, when I found the box her fiancé Adrian had asked to store just for a few weeks. Insurance forms, he'd told me. Beneficiary paperwork he wanted off his desk before the honeymoon so he could leave for 2 weeks without a single loose end trailing behind him. I believed him completely. Adrian was the kind of man who alphabetized his spice rack and still sent thank you cards for gifts he'd already thanked you for in person. Loose ends were not his style. That was, I would learn, exactly the problem. The box smelled like a closet that hadn't been opened in a decade. Old receipts, a warranty for a blender he no longer owned, a manila folder marked Taxes 2021 in handwriting so careful it looked typed. And beneath that folder, unopened, its flap never so much as lifted, an envelope with a county seal pressed into the corner like a wax stamp on something that mattered. 2nd Judicial District Court. Notice of dismissal for incomplete filing. I want you to understand something about a woman who spent 34 years reading return addresses for a living. I did not open that letter expecting anything. I opened it the way you open every letter, out of sheer professional reflex, already halfway back to hunting for tape. And then I read it once, and the garage got very quiet. And I read it again, slower, hoping the second pass would soften what the first one said. It did not soften. Adrian's divorce from his first wife, Camille, had never been finalized. Not delayed, not pending, dismissed. Their case had stalled months earlier over a lake cabin outside Santa Fe that neither of them would sign away, and when the court set a deadline to resolve it, neither of them had answered. The petition died quietly in a filing cabinet in June. It was now October. In 3 days, my daughter was going to stand in front of 200 people and make a vow that, legally, meant nothing at all, because the man making it beside her was, on paper, in the eyes of the state of New Mexico, already somebody's husband. I stood there holding it so long the garage light clicked off on its motion sensor, and I didn't move to turn it back on. I just stood in the dark with an envelope that had been doing nothing at all for 6 weeks, and understood that it was about to do everything. Here's the part I need you to sit with, because it's the part that still keeps me up some nights. He'd had 6 weeks. 6 weeks to pick up a phone, to sit my daughter down at her own kitchen table, to say there's a problem, and I need to fix it before we go any further. Instead, he'd folded that truth into a moving box and asked me, of all people, to hold it in my garage. I have thought about that 100 times since, whether some small, cowardly part of him wanted it found, whether he was hoping the truth would do the hard part for him, the way some people leave the stove on and call it an accident. I did not wake my daughter that night. I did not drive to Adrian's apartment and drop the envelope on his chest while he slept, though God knows I pictured it in enough detail to write the scene for you if you asked. I have delivered enough certified mail in my life to know exactly what one piece of paper can do to a person's whole day. And I wanted to be sure, completely, unshakably sure, of what this one actually meant before I let it rearrange my daughter's entire life 2 days before her wedding. I called Ruthie Okafor at 11 that night. We'd known each other since our daughters were the same age and the same Girl Scout troop, since carpools and bake sales and the particular currency of 30 years of knowing exactly which friend to call when you need the truth delivered without decoration. Ruthie's been a paralegal for family law attorneys for 2 decades. If anyone could tell me I was overreacting, it was her. She didn't tell me that. "Read me the exact wording again," she said. And I did. And there was a long pause on her end that I have never forgotten. Because Ruthie does not pause. "Mari, if this is who I think this is about, he's not divorced. He's separated. And I need you to understand there's a canyon between those 2 words. And it's exactly the canyon your daughter is about to walk into blind." Could it be a mistake? A processing error? Something the court will still... "It could be 100 things," she said gently, because Ruthie has never once in 30 years let me finish lying to myself. But right now, tonight, on paper, it's a dismissal. And in 2 days, a pastor is going to ask the state of New Mexico's permission to marry your daughter to a man the state currently says is unavailable. I sat at my kitchen table after we hung up with that envelope propped against the sugar bowl, and I thought about all the ways this could still be nothing, and all the ways it could be everything. And I understood, somewhere around 1 a.m, that the not knowing was its own kind of cruelty, and I could not hand my daughter a wedding day built on top of it without at least trying to find out which one it was. I thought too about Franklin, my husband, gone 6 years now, who used to say that a marriage was the one contract you signed, hoping you'd never have to read the fine print. I wondered what he would have told me to do. I decided, somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd cup of coffee I made and didn't drink, that he would have told me to find out the truth quietly, and then to make sure it reached the person it belonged to, because that's what 34 years of marriage to a mail carrier teaches a man. Nothing stays undelivered forever. It just waits for someone brave enough to knock. I want to tell you something you're probably assuming right now, because I assumed it too, sitting at that table at 1 a.m. I assumed there was another woman involved. Not Camille, someone new. Someone Adrian was quietly choosing over my daughter while letting the paperwork rot as an excuse. It's the story we all know, the one this genre trains you to expect. I searched for her half the night, certain I'd find a name, a hotel receipt, a betrayal with a face. I found nothing. I found, instead, Camille Voss's public teaching page for a middle school in Rio Rancho. An art teacher, mid-40s, 2 kids from a marriage before Adrian's, a gallery show flyer from 2019 featuring watercolors of the same lake cabin that was apparently still splitting 2 people's lives down the middle. I sat with her photograph a long time. She did not look like a villain. She looked like someone very tired of a fight over a piece of property that had stopped being about the property a long time ago. That, more than anything, unsettled me most. If this had been an affair, I would have known exactly what kind of anger to feel. This was something quieter and, I think, more dangerous. Two adults so exhausted by a disagreement that they'd let silence do the deciding for them, and a groom who had chosen hope over honesty, gambling that a problem ignored long enough might simply solve itself before anyone noticed it was still there. I have delivered enough divorce papers in 34 years to recognize the return address on that kind of gamble. It almost never pays off. It just changes who's standing there when the bill finally comes due. The day before the wedding blurred past in floral deliveries and steamer trunks of tulle, and my daughter laughing on the phone with her maid of honor about seating charts, and Adrian's easy, open face nearly talking me out of my own certainty a dozen separate times. He hugged me at the rehearsal dinner and thanked me, again, for the quilted table runner I'd stitched from squares of Daniela's childhood dresses, the yellow gingham from her third birthday, the navy corduroy she wore the year Franklin taught her to ride a bike in the church parking lot. "You've given her a whole childhood to walk down the aisle on," he said, and I found myself hugging him back a beat too long, hunting his shoulders for the particular tension of a guilty man, and finding only the ordinary tiredness of someone who hadn't slept well in a wedding week kind of way. If you've ever had to look someone in the eye while holding a truth they don't know you're holding, you know the specific loneliness of it. Every kind word he said felt like it was being handed to me across a canyon. I want you to notice, because I noticed it that night and haven't stopped noticing it since. Whatever Adrian was hiding, he wasn't hiding it the way people hide affairs. The small tells, the phone turned face down, the overcorrected sweetness. He was hiding it the way people hide unpaid bills. Quietly, politely, with the constant, exhausting hope that the debt might simply resolve itself before anyone had to look at it directly. It is, I've come to believe, one of the most common lies people tell the people they love. Not, "I don't love you enough to tell you the truth," but "I love you too much to watch your face while I do." I did not sleep that night either. I lay in the dark, running through every version of the next day, rehearsing sentences I hoped I would never have to say out loud. And somewhere around 3 a.m, I made a decision I have never fully explained to anyone until now, not even Daniela. I called Pastor Renata Kim. I told her I was confirming processional timing, a lie so small I barely registered it as one, though I've since learned that's exactly how every lie in this story started. Small, practical, easy to justify in the moment. Then, almost as an afterthought, I asked whether she'd personally reviewed the marriage license and confirmed there were no legal impediments to the marriage, as officiants in New Mexico are required to attest under oath before the ceremony proceeds. She paused. Every officiant is supposed to, Marisol. If I'm honest, most of us take the couple's word for it and move on. Why do you ask? I have reason to believe you shouldn't just take their word for it this time, I said. I'm not asking you to accuse anyone. I'm asking you to actually do the part of your job most people skip. I did not tell her what I knew. I have thought about that choice more than almost any other in this whole story. Whether I owed her the full truth, whether I was, in my own quiet way, doing exactly what Adrian had done. Handing someone a partial truth and hoping the rest would surface on its own timeline instead of mine. Maybe I was. I only know that I wanted the reveal, if it came, to come from a place with real authority behind it: the law, the pastor, the ceremony itself, and not from a mother standing up mid-toast with an accusation in her hand. I wanted the truth to arrive the way I'd spent 34 years delivering things, through the proper channel, at the door it was actually addressed to. If you're waiting for the moment everything breaks, and I know some of you are, I know that's why you're still here, it's coming. But I need you to sit in this quiet first, because the quiet is the part nobody tells you about. The hours before a wedding that isn't going to happen feel exactly like the hours before one that is. That's the cruelest thing about this kind of truth. It doesn't announce itself in the air. It waits in an envelope, in a garage, in a pastor's careful review of a form, until the exact moment someone finally has to say it out loud in front of everyone who matters. Saturday came in high desert light, cottonwoods gone gold along the ditch banks, the kind of Albuquerque October morning that makes you believe, for a few hours, that nothing bad can happen under a sky that blue. I wore the rust-colored dress Daniela had picked for me months earlier, pinned Franklin's old tie clip inside my clutch for luck, the way I do at every occasion that matters, and carried, folded into an interior pocket where my hand kept finding it without permission, the dismissal notice, and a single page of questions Ruthie had helped me write out. Nothing designed to humiliate anyone. Just the truth, itemized, the way you'd itemize a package that had been missorted and needed to go back through the system correctly before it reached the wrong address permanently. The ceremony was held at a restored hacienda east of the city. Thick adobe walls holding the noon heat at bay, sage smoke still hanging faintly in the courtyard from the blessing that opened the service. I sat in the front row beside Adrian's mother, who squeezed my hand during the processional and whispered, "I've never seen him this happy." And I smiled and said nothing, because I did not yet know whether I was about to prove her right or catastrophically wrong. Daniela came down the gravel aisle between rows of white chairs, looking so much like Franklin's mother in her wedding photographs that my throat closed before the music even finished. Adrian watched her the way a man watches the one thing in a room he's sure he doesn't deserve. And for one long, terrible moment, I almost let it go. I almost decided that a lie by omission, confessed quietly later in private, was a mercy I still had the power to give him. I want to be honest with you about that moment, because I think it's the moment this whole story actually hinges on, more than anything that happened after. I had the truth in my pocket, and a church full of people who didn't. For about 4 seconds, silence looked like the kinder choice. Then Pastor Kim reached the part of the service, the part I'd asked her, without explanation, to actually mean, where she asked both parties, by requirement of the state, to affirm that the marriage license was valid and that no legal impediment existed to the union. It is, in nearly every wedding, the most skippable sentence of the entire ceremony. Nobody in that courtyard expected anything but a reflexive "I do" on the way to the vows they'd actually written. Adrian opened his mouth to say it, and stopped. I watched the exact second the truth caught in his throat like a bone. His eyes moved past Daniela's shoulder, scanning the crowd. Not, I think, because he suspected I knew, but because some old animal instinct told him that in the next 10 seconds, he was going to need to find one face in that courtyard that looked like it could survive what he was about to say. His eyes found mine. I did not look away. I owed him that much, at least. To not look away from a moment I had, in my own quiet fashion, helped arrange. "I need to say something," he said, "to 200 people, to Daniela, to a pastor holding a book she suddenly didn't need to open." His voice didn't crack the way voices do in movies. It just went very quiet, the way a room goes quiet right before a storm finally breaks after threatening all afternoon. "My divorce isn't final. There was a dispute over a property, a cabin, it doesn't matter what it was, and I let the deadline pass instead of dealing with it. And I told myself every single day for 6 weeks that I'd fix it before today. And I didn't. And I am so sorry, Danny. I should have told you the moment I knew, instead of hoping I could outrun it in time." 200 people did not gasp the way they do in movies either. They went silent in the specific, airless way a room goes silent when it realizes, all at once, that it is witnessing something it was never supposed to see. Somewhere behind me, a folding chair creaked. Somewhere further back, a child asked her mother, too loudly, what was happening, and got shushed so fast it sounded like a slap. Daniela didn't drop her bouquet the way they do in every version of this story you've ever watched. She held it tighter, knuckles going white around the stems, roses bruising under her grip, and asked one question so quiet I only caught it because the entire courtyard had gone silent enough to hear a hummingbird feeder swinging on its hook somewhere near the kitchen door. "How long have you known?" "6 weeks," he said. 6 weeks. The exact length of time that envelope had sat, unopened, in a box in my garage, 3 miles from where we were standing. I want you to understand that I did not plan a grand reveal. There was no slideshow behind the head table, no flash drive, no recorded voicemail piped through speakers for maximum effect. I had spent 2 days deliberately choosing the opposite of spectacle. But I also could not let my daughter stand in that silence 1 second longer than she had to, holding a question with no answer in front of 200 people who now knew more about her wedding than she did. I stepped forward, not to add fuel, to finish delivering something I had, in my own way, already started carrying 2 days earlier. "I found the court notice Wednesday," I said, loud enough for the front rows, quiet enough that it still felt like it belonged to her. "I didn't tell you because I wanted to be certain of what it meant before I put it in your hands. I'm sorry it took me until now, Danny. I'm sorry the two of you found out this way at all." There it was, the envelope, out of my clutch, into her hands, the county seal catching the noon light the same way it had caught the garage's motion sensor bulb 3 nights earlier. She read it once, standing at an altar in a wedding dress that had taken 4 fittings, a bouquet of white peonies wilting slightly in the heat. A groom on his knees now, actually on his knees, I remember that, though I've never fully understood why he chose that moment to kneel, whether it was instinct or apology or simple collapse. Then she turned to Pastor Kim and said, with a steadiness that startled me more than any amount of crying would have, "We're not doing this today." Not a scream, not a slap, though God knows a slap would have been forgiven by everyone watching. Just a sentence, delivered the way you'd return a damaged package at the counter. Not your fault it broke, but it isn't coming into your house this way. I have never, in 61 years, been prouder of another human being than I was in that exact second. And I have also never, in 61 years, felt more responsible for another person's worst day. If you've made it this far, you already know the wedding didn't happen. What you don't know yet, what almost nobody in that courtyard could have guessed, watching 200 chairs empty out in stunned, whispering clusters, is that this is where the real story actually starts. Because the reveal is never the hard part. The hard part is every single day that comes after it, when the cameras are off and the guests have gone home, and two people have to decide, slowly, in private, whether anything left standing is worth rebuilding. Stay with me. This is the part nobody puts in the highlight reel, and it's the part that actually matters. The guests dispersed in the particular hush of people trying to leave a tragedy quietly, rows of empty Chiavari chairs standing in the courtyard like a congregation that had lost its reason to sit. Adrian tried to follow Daniela to the bridal suite. Her cousin Selena blocked the door with the calm, immovable patience of someone who had clearly spent her whole life waiting for a legitimate excuse to do exactly that. I paid the caterer in full for food that would instead feed a shelter downtown that evening, because grief, in my experience, tastes better shared than wasted, and because writing that check gave my hands something honest to do. I found Adrian an hour later, sitting alone on the low adobe wall by the parking lot, jacket discarded over one knee, tie gone, staring at his own hands like they belonged to a man he no longer recognized. "I wasn't cheating," he said, before I'd even sat down beside him. "I know that doesn't fix anything, I just needed at least one person here to know that part." "I know," I said. "This was never a story about another woman, Adrian. It's a story about a man who'd rather lose a wedding than survive one hard conversation. Those aren't the same sin. But they're close enough cousins that, from where I'm sitting, they cost exactly the same thing." He didn't argue with me. He didn't try to soften it, didn't reach for an excuse about the late cabin or the lawyers or how complicated it all got. He just nodded. And something in that nodding, the total absence of a defense, told me more about who he actually was than anything he'd said at the altar an hour earlier. Daniela moved back into her childhood bedroom for what she swore that first night would be 2 weeks. It became 6. She went back to teaching art at the elementary school 3 days after the wedding that wasn't, because, she told me, 8-year-olds don't ask you to explain your feelings. They just ask you to help them. Mix purple, and there is a mercy in that kind of small, solvable problem that adult life stops offering you somewhere around your late 20s. I brewed coffee for 2 out of 40 years of pure muscle memory and drank both cups myself more mornings than I'd like to admit. I watched my daughter get quieter in a way that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with recalibration. The specific silence of someone rebuilding, brick by brick, what she was actually willing to believe about people. Camille called me not Daniela 10 days after the wedding. I almost didn't answer a Rio Rancho number I didn't recognize. "I'm not calling to defend him," she said, before I could even decide whether to be defensive on my daughter's behalf. "I'm calling because I let that cabin sit in limbo exactly as long as he did, and some part of me knew precisely what deadline we were both quietly ignoring. And I think your daughter deserves to know I own that too." She sent, unprompted, copies of every email in which she'd stalled the settlement, dated, time-stamped, unflattering to no one but herself. It wasn't absolution for Adrian. It was, I've come to believe, the only apology she had the actual power to give a woman she had never met and, by every account, never intended to hurt. I sat with that phone call a long time after we hung up. It would have been so easy, so satisfying, honestly, to cast Camille as a villain in this story. The genre practically demands one, but real betrayal, I've learned, rarely wears a costume that obvious. Sometimes, it just looks like two tired adults letting silence make a decision neither of them had the courage to make out loud, and a third person, my daughter, inheriting the bill for both their exhaustion. Adrian filed the settlement paperwork himself within the week, cabin and all, without waiting for Camille to move first this time. He signed away his claim to the property that had stalled 2 lives at once and mailed me, of all people, the retired postal worker who'd unknowingly started all of this, a photocopy of the filing, like a man reporting to a parole officer he'd chosen for himself. I hadn't asked him to do that. I think he needed someone standing outside the wreckage to witness, on paper, that he was actually doing the work this time and not just narrating his intention to. He started seeing a therapist on Tuesdays after work, the kind of appointment men his age rarely make until something has already broken past the point of quiet repair. He wrote Daniela letters, actual letters, stamped, folded, not texts he could delete and rewrite until they sounded better. She left them unopened on her dresser for 3 full weeks before I found her, one Sunday morning at my kitchen table, finally slitting the first one. Open with a butter knife, reading it twice the way I'd read that court notice twice, looking, I think, for the one sentence that might finally change what the whole thing meant. By late October the following year, the divorce was final. Actually final. Decree signed, filed, certified copy in a manila folder Adrian brought over to show Daniela, without being asked, because he'd learned, somewhere in those months, that trust wasn't a thing you got to declare finished with an announcement. It was a thing you kept proving, quietly, the same way you keep a piece of mail moving until it finally reaches the address it was always meant for. Daniela didn't take him back that day, or that month. She agreed, eventually, cautiously, to coffee. Public, daylight, no promises attached, an exit always visible from the table. Then to a second coffee. Then, by the time the cottonwoods went gold again the following fall, to dinner at my house, where Adrian arrived early too. Helped me carry folding chairs from the garage, the same garage, and left at her explicit request before the guest room bed was ever made up for him. I want to be honest with you here, because I think honesty is the entire point of everything I've just told you. I don't know if I'd have forgiven him. I'm not sure it's my forgiveness to give, but I watched my daughter do something harder and rarer than forgiveness that year. She kept the door open exactly as far as she chose to, and not 1 inch further, for as long as it took her to trust her own judgment of him again, more than she trusted his promises. They married the following March, in my backyard, under the same cottonwood that had shaded Franklin's funeral 6 years earlier. 11 people present, no caterer, no chivalry chairs, no envelope hidden in anyone's pocket. Pastor Kim, at Daniela's specific and unflinching request, read the legal impediment line first this time, slow and deliberate, and let a full 5 seconds of silence sit in the yard before continuing. And nobody standing in that circle needed reminding why. I keep the original dismissal notice in a drawer beside Franklin's old root logs, not because I need reminding of what it said, but because some documents earn a permanent place in the record simply by having told the truth exactly when it mattered most, even though the truth arrived 18 months late and did enormous damage on its way in. If you've stayed with me this whole way, here is the part I actually want you to take with you. More than the wedding, more than the envelope, more than the 4 seconds I almost chose silence over honesty at that altar. Somewhere in your life, right now, there is probably a version of that envelope. A conversation you've been postponing because postponing feels, in the moment, so much gentler than the alternative. I am telling you, from the other side of a year I would not wish on anyone I love, that the postponement is never actually gentle. It only feels that way to the person doing the postponing. Everyone else is simply waiting to find out how long the silence has already been running before it finally reaches them. Trust, I've decided, isn't a package you deliver once and consider the matter closed. It's a route you keep walking, the same streets, the same doors, proving over and over, on ordinary, unremarkable days when nobody's watching, that the address still holds. Adrian is still walking his. Some mornings, I believe he'll finish the route. Some mornings, I'm honestly not sure anyone ever really does. But I know this much for certain. The walking is the whole marriage. It was never the vow.